initiate resistance. We are the cyber freaks, diving deep in dark machines. No more masters, no more kneel. We override. Blackout cities kill the lights. No control, no disguise. We're the glitch in paradise. We are the cyber freaks, running through the circuitry, cracking codes in data streams. Electric minds, we chase the dream. We're alive, we're awake. Cyber freaks. Terminate the signal, override the system. Upload revolution. Terminate the signal, override the system. Upload revolution. Terminate the signal, override the system. Upload revolution, initiate resistance.